Hello, welcome to Harlem Stories. Today we are back and we are going to talk about our Thanksgiving episode. Since we already have an Halloween episode and we've got a Christmas episode, we are adding a Thanksgiving one. My colleague Mark, unfortunately, was not able to make it for the recordings today. He will be back soon, but was unavailable today. Just a little housekeeping for the Harlem Stories podcast. We broadcast bi-weekly, hopefully that you are finding value and enjoying the podcast. Well, as I mentioned today, we are going to be talking about Thanksgiving and how it relates to Harlem and Upper Manhattan as a generalization. Now, I'm going to make a long stretch here and kind of connecting some dots that are really probably not meant to be connected. But we're going to have two mini stories here today regarding Thanksgiving. And it's really going to be the intersection of Norman Rockwell, the famous artist, and drug kingpin Bumpy Johnson. Now, that's a strange connection to draw, but there are connections to Thanksgiving for both of them. So, we did a couple of episodes that were Halloween themed and an episode on Santa Claus. We're going to be fixing that and two mini stories in this one episode. So we're going to first talk about Norman Rockwell. He's one of America's most iconic artists and known for his portraits in American life. His first address was on the Upper West Side on 103rd Street, which there's a brand new Toll Brothers building called the Rockwell, giving a tribute to Norman Rockwell there. And ironically, he lived there from 1894 to 1978. But prior to that address on the Upper West Side, he grew up in the Sugar Hill section of Hamilton Heights in Northwest Harlem, now recognized as a historic district. During his childhood, he lived at 789 St. Nicholas Avenue, which, if you're not familiar with the address, it's between 149th Street and 150th Street on St. Nicholas. The townhouse where he lived was converted to a 4-unit condo in 2006. It's a 4-story walk-up building. It's 18 feet wide. But as with most townhouses on the avenues, there wasn't much, if really any, backyard. The apartments have east and west-facing windows. The east-facing windows are open and with the wide St. Nicholas Avenue and adjacent St. Nicholas Place streets with low-rise homes lining the block, creating an extra-wide opportunity to make these apartments feel very open. The west-facing windows look upon the roof of the parking garage for 441 Convent Avenue, also a condo right now. And while that view is not necessarily all that pretty, it is the second floor of a roof, but it allows for a lot of natural light, all throughout the afternoon, and you do get backyards of some townhouses. Now, at this location of 789 Convent, you also are right by the James Bailey Mansion. So, if you're looking out onto the avenue over there, you can actually see it from outside your window. And we have a whole separate episode geared toward the James Bailey Mansion. And in case you haven't heard that episode or are thinking, who is James Bailey? You probably do know of James Bailey, but it's one of those names like you're not connecting the dots unless it's context. But James Bailey was the Bailey in Barnum and Bailey Circus, the greatest show on earth. So for that reference over there, I wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of a anchoring point there. So in the Sugar Hill neighborhood, Norman Rockwell would have been seeing this neighborhood developing with apartment houses being built all around him and lots of constant change. The Hamilton Heights episode of the Harlem Stories podcast talks about the early development of the neighborhood. When Norman Rockwell lived in the neighborhood, it would have predated the Sugar Hill name and characteristics of the area as it was first developing as a new neighborhood. Now, he drew, I guess, or actually he painted this iconic Thanksgiving painting. He was a well-known fixture in the life of a typical American family, famous for cover illustrations of everyday life he created for the Saturday Evening Post magazine for nearly 5 decades. His best known works include Rosie the Riveter, which I think most people probably are familiar with, The Problem We All Live With, which is that iconic image of the civil rights movement with Ruby Bridges, the 6-year-old African American girl on the way to William Frantz Elementary School, and of course the For Freedom series. Now, not everyone is familiar with the For Freedom series, but or it might be a situation where they might be familiar with it, but they might not know the names of it. But the Four Freedoms is a series of 4 oil paintings made in 1943. The Four Freedoms refer to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's January 1941 Four Freedoms State of the Union address, in which he identified essential human rights that should be universally protected. The theme was incorporated into the Atlantic Charter and became part of the Charter of the United Nations. So these paintings, they were reproduced in the Saturday Evening Post over 4 consecutive weeks in 1943, alongside essays by prominent thinkers of the day. They became the highlight of a touring exhibition sponsored by the Post and the U.S. Department of Treasury. The exhibition and the accompanying sales drives of war bonds raised over $132 million. Now, in today's world, $132 million for a national war drive doesn't sound like a lot, but think about it back then, just how much that inflation would have impacted that. So that was a really significant number for its day. And, that was a really great thing in order to, raise money for the Treasury. FDR's speech laid out the Four Freedoms, and it goes into part of his speech. In the future days, which we'll seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, everywhere and in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation to a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an actual physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. Now, obviously, we're living in tumultuous times, and I'm recording this in mid-October of 2024, right before a presidential election, but with multiple significant wars going on throughout the world. So obviously, FDR's speech, really still holds true today. But part of his speech continued, that is no vision of a distant millennium. It's a definitive basis for a kind of world attainable in our own time and generation. That kind of world is the very antithesis of the so-called new order of tyranny, which the dictators seek to create with the crash of a bomb. So, that was FDR's speech, and contained within that third painting is the third freedom, and the piece is entitled "Freedom of Want," and it's one of Norman Rockwell's most famous pieces. Is of a family sitting around the dining room table with the Thanksgiving turkey being lowered down onto the center of the table. The painting was first published in the Saturday Evening Post in November 1942, and many refer to this painting as Rockwell's Thanksgiving. So I wanted to kind of bring that to the attention of all my listeners, and one of the big things that brings I guess a connection of Norman Rockwell to the Harlem Stories podcast. So I promised 2 stories today for today's episodes, and story number 2 couldn't be more different, but still has a Thanksgiving theme to it. So we're going to go back in time, back into the 1970s, where Harlem was a very different period and a very different environment, where much of the neighborhood was dominated by drug kingpin Bumpy Johnson. So we mostly discuss in this podcast the positives of Upper Manhattan to combat the outdated perception of these neighborhoods. But sometimes it's important to revisit the ugly side of the past, and that's part of this story. Now, don't worry, we will have a positive, upbeat message, contained within here, but sometimes you just got to cover a little ugly. So Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, named due to a large bump in the back of his head. There's plenty written about Bumpy on the internet, so I'm only going to quickly summarize a bit of his background. As a young man, he attracted the attention of gangster William Bub Hewitt, who assigned him bodyguard jobs for high-rolling illegals number gamblers in Harlem. He was a sinner, which landed him in prison for a decade. By the time he was 30, he spent half of his life in prison. When he left prison in 1932, he met Harlem crime boss Stephanie St. Clair, a.k.a. Madam Queen, or Queen of the Policy Rackets, and she took him under her wing. Now, she is quite famous in Harlem history as well, but ultimately, he wound up partnering with her, and the two of them waged war against crime boss Dutch Schultz. So now you're getting into a little bit, of Harlem history and a little bit of wider New York City history as well. Bumpy ultimately murdered and kidnapped over 40 people during this war, but Schultz and his associates had the corrupt law enforcement on their side, dominating illegal gambling rackets in Harlem. And Dutch Schultz was skimming and scamming within the mob rackets, and Lucky Luciano ordered a hit on Schultz, and he was shot to death in 1935. Around the same time, St. Clair, who was lying low, decided to hand over her business to Bumpy. With Schultz gone, Bumpy and Luciano entered into an uneasy alliance, allowing Bumpy to control all of Harlem's rackets as an independent operation as long as Luciano's crew got their cut. Luciano's crew was later identified as the Genovese crime family. And I had mentioned that in another episode in East Harlem, the pretty much the founding of the Genovese crime family started in East Harlem. Now, the community, they feared Bumpy, but they also loved and respected him and often referred to him as Robin Hood. He gave the most vulnerable among his fellow Harlemites. His action of handing out free turkeys during Thanksgiving and delivering meals and gifts would be the material for pop culture to draw on for decades later, and deemed Godfather of Harlem. This scene of the drug dealer that is both feared and loved can be seen giving out whole turkeys for Thanksgiving, depicted in movies such as American Gangster and New Jack City. With his renegade criminal background, philanthropy, and love for flashy clothes and poetry, Johnson was a character that Hollywood couldn't deny. Among the films that have portrayed him include The Cotton Club, The Hoodlum, American Gangster, and I also mentioned previously New Jack City. So on the small screen, he was portrayed by Forrest Whitaker in the 2019 series The Godfather of Harlem, which is still filming today. Pulled from Wikipedia, some film and TV references to Bumpy Johnson include, on the film side, 1971 film Shaft and its 1973 sequel, Shaft's Big Score. Moses Gunn portrays Bumpy Jonas, a character based upon Johnson. Not a shocker there. In 1972 film Come Back, Charleston Blue, the title character is loosely based on Bumpy Johnson, a criminal who's looked on as a positive role model among the people. In the 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz, Paul Benjamin plays a character based on Bumpy Johnson, known as English. In the 1984 film The Cotton Club, Lawrence Fishburne, who I love, plays a character based on Bumpy Johnson, Bumpy Rhodes. These guys aren't straying too far in the movie roles to his actual name. In 1997 film Hoodlum, Johnson is again portrayed by Fishburne. In 1999 film Life, musician Rick James plays a Harlem gangster, Spanky Johnson, who was loosely inspired by Bumpy Johnson. And in the 2007 film American Gangster, Johnson is portrayed by Clarence Williams III. And I know that his role was really at the very beginning of the film, and actually the scene where he dies is actually located at 135th and Broadway on the southeast corner. It's currently a pediatrician office, but that's where that one was filmed. And in 2018, the Netflix documentary series Drug Lords, Johnson was featured in the third episode of the first season. On the television side, Bumpy Johnson, their references, they had an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. It's reported that Johnson allegedly helped the three escapees of Alcatraz get to the shores of San Francisco. It said that he arranged for the boat to pick up the three men out of the bay. The boat then dropped the escapees off at Pier 13 in San Francisco's Hunters Point district. So that was one reference. Another one was in the second episode of the third series of HBO's The Wire, which is one of my all-time favorite shows, and the episode entitled All Due Respect, Bumpy is mentioned just before Tree, a dealer for cheese Wagstaff. If you watch the show, you know who he is. Kills Jelly over a dogfight in which Cheese's dog lost. The three-level gangsters discuss an incident when Bumpy allegedly attacked a police station single-handedly. This is expanded upon in Richard Price's audio commentary for that episode. So, like the behind-the-scenes, making of special edition of The Wire, they talk about that. And finally, the final reference over here is cable network Epix, now MGM Plus, premiered the crime drama television series Godfather of Harlem in the fall of 2019. Forrest Whitaker plays the role of Bumpy Johnson. So that gives you a sense of the role that he played and how significant his position was in it. But yeah, you'll see that iconic scene recreated where Bumpy would have a box truck full of turkeys for Thanksgiving and just giving them away to random people in the neighborhood as they pass by or specifically know to come by because word gets out quick. So anyway, that is a little bit of the uglier history. At least there was a positive component to it of Harlem history. But yeah, has the neighborhood changed over the decades. But with that, thank you for staying tuned for my Thanksgiving episode. And you've been listening to Harlem Stories. Thank you and have a great day.